This broken down church is all that remains of the lost kingdom of Mbaza Congo. Mbaza Congo being the capital. Now, Mbaza Congo is located in northern Angola. I know, a little confusing, right? Well, that's because that's how big Congo was. Now, if this kingdom was so big, how come this little church, this little ruin, is all that's left? Why isn't there more stuff? Well, first we have to calculate a few facts. Fact number one, Mbaza Congo had about 500,000 people at its peak. I want to say that again, Mbaza Congo, not the whole of the Mbazas that were around. And if you see the map, there's way more. Mbaza Congo, the city, had 500,000 people at the time. And if we compare it to other cities that existed around the world, this is extremely large. Example number one, the Japanese eras, right? Kyoto at its peak in the 1600s at the same time as this was about 400,000. And even when Edo was established at its peak, it was about 400,000. This was about 500,000, so more by about 100,000. And that's only counting the people who were permanent residents. As remember, this was a giant port for in and out Portuguese and other people who would unfortunately be enslaved in other parts of the world. Now, of course, there were places like Beijing and stuff like that that were way bigger, but this proves that this place was not a small place. It was occupied by a lot of people, which means you need to take that into account when I tell you the story about what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a tribe. I want you to understand that. I'm not talking about a tribe. I'm not talking about a group of 6,000, 7,000 people who came together, met some Portuguese dude, and, oh, we're going to trade some few things here and there with these guys because all 7,000 of them, or 200,000 or 100,000 of them are like, we're talking about 500,000 people, and that's one city. Remember, I told you that the Kingdom of Congo was a confederation. So the second part is Mtsundi, Mbaza Tsundi. Mbaza Tsundi is important for another reason. Let's read quickly on Wikipedia before I give my opinion. In 2015 to 2018, an archaeological team called Congo King began excavating at the site of Kingonki and subsequently discovered enough material evidence to identify the site as Mbanza, capital of Mtsundi, from the late 17th and 19th centuries. According to W. Holman Bentley, a British Baptist missionary in Congo in 1879, the last Duke of Mtsundi had not been buried for want of a successor, and thus the body was retained, carefully mummified, and protected from about 1835 until Bentley reported it. The date confirms quite closely to the date of the last burials at Kindoki. Okay, so why is this important? Well, this is another province, and it's only one of many, but we'll go through the other ones quickly. So the reason why this one is important is because it would play a very good role. We'll talk about that later. It'll play a very good role in establishing some kings and stuff like that. Now remember, I told you it's a confederation, so kings didn't have to come from the capital. They could come from just about anywhere. But, and we read this before in the book, but a lot of the times they were liked ruling from the capital, but the capital could move. And you could see families who have dynasties, but they have nothing to do with the original family that controlled things. Like this guy, Mvemba Azinga, right? Mvemba is his name. Azinga, I think, is the name because of his father is So he's Nzinga, and he's from the Sundi clan. The Sundi settlement. I don't want to call it a clan. Again, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who live in established areas and have centralized power. Given also they're also a part democracy when it comes to rule, but you can see that the way they ruled was not necessarily everyone gets raised in the same palace. They get to rule. People go from place to place, and they get to rule by being chosen and by being part of some nobility of different clans. So, in other words, it's like, let's take America for example. It's like if in America, um, well, it's actually like America, where as long as you're a politician, you're a person of power in any of the places, then you can be elected as the king. But obviously, it's not just any man in the kingdom. It wasn't necessarily in just any person. But of course, we would see other people who weren't as powerful later become powerful and then rule. So there's a back and forth. And of course, there are people who, quote unquote, had the right to rule by other kingdom statuses, but they would not. But that's Sundi. That's talking about one place. We haven't even gotten to the next few. Now you're probably thinking, how can someone have multiple sons in multiple states, multiple provinces? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it does if you're polygamous. And of course, when the Portuguese first came, they were more closer to the Nsundi than they were with Mbaza Congo. And so this had a consequence, which is that Mbaza Congo kind of rejected Christianity early. So Nzinga Nkui, who was one of the earliest to become Christian, because of polygamy, and he knew like power rides with polygamy in this area. For the reason, one of the reasons that I just gave you, he said, nah, forget that, let's go back. And that's why I don't call him by his Portuguese name, because that was something he picked for other reasons. I could call Joao that because he kept that name till he died. But this guy, he doesn't deserve a Portuguese name. He deserves a real African name because that's what he wanted to be called and that's what he stuck to. Now, Mbaza Mbata, as you can see, so Mbaza Congo is the one highlighted in red. Mbaza Mbata, another giant chunk, is. Now you're probably wondering, why am I calling it Mbanza when I know that they didn't call it that? They called it Ngongo Mbata. Well, I'm using the word the way they would have used it because Mbaza, as we saw in the dictionary, meant metropolis. And I think it's fair to say that a place which once excavated looks like this, I think we can say, yeah, it probably qualifies as a metropolis. Now, from the research also done by Bernard Clist, Pierre de Marat, Gilles Maurice, and Koen Busden, in order to understand the origins of Kingdom of Congo, the Congo King Research Group conducted at first a survey in the area usually regarded as former kingdoms, provincial capital states of Mbazansundi and Bazambata in the lower Congo province of the DRC during the summer of 2012. Several test excavations and radiocarbon dates are starting. So we can see here a small overview of the places, and you can see written at the bottom Kindoki site, 4 site, central area of excavation, position of the living tomb, feature number 10, deep pit, and feature number 14, earthworn. So again, we're talking about a place that was civilizing. And remember, these guys actually got, firstly, they had their own wall technology that is continuous with Bantu people, but they also employed foreigners like the Portuguese to come and build things for them. So this isn't a matter of getting slaves or getting low skilled labor to do it. And in fact, I could actually read a part where they talked about how a lot of the work that the Portuguese did was mainly men, but in the custom of the Africans, it's females. Now remember that these places are actually inland. They're not outside. Some of them are at the coast, but the one that I've just mentioned is inland. And a big problem that was happening at the time is that Europeans were not equipped to handle the diseases that Africans had been dealing with for years. Everyone was diseased. Forget curing anything. Everyone was diseased. Europeans had diseases, Africans had diseases, Native Americans had diseases, but they had built up immunity by being in those regions. And so Portuguese, when they came in, they lived for a couple months before they died if they went too internal. And so a lot of the help that they're talking about was not as deep as some people claim, because of course they couldn't even do it. In fact, you've heard people say that during the slave trade, a lot of the African criminals, it was illegal at the time to steal slaves, but a lot of the African criminals would go inland and go fetch slaves for the Portuguese. And the reason why that would happen is because the Portuguese couldn't get in themselves, because they would catch something and die. Even worse, be trapped there and become a slave themselves. Next is Mbazambamba. And you can see over there it's highlighted in yellow. It's clearly near Angola. And basically, there you go. It's another one of these provinces. I mean, not much can be said that I haven't said before. We're talking about there still needs to be excavations and all this other stuff. Now, there's also Kindoki right there at the top in orange. That's another province. And then there were other provinces that would get in and out as the winds of fortune came back and forth. But we don't really need to go through every single one right now. What we need to talk about is the fact that we're talking about, and again, there's a reason why they use the word Mbanza, because that word means metropolis. It doesn't mean place, it doesn't mean area, it doesn't mean scattering family, it means metropolis, as translated by the Italians at the time. So this isn't a word that would be used later. This is a word that was used at the time. And they were the Italians, the Spaniards, and other people who would translate it, but those two are the ones that are used in the dictionary, fully accepted that word. And they were critical. Like this dictionary, a lot of the stuff they put in there was not necessarily approved by the people of Congo. This was them just being honest about what they saw. As a historical record, the Mbanza word, flawless, beautiful, it tells us what was there. Now, of course, we have to explain something. Why no ruins? The answer is actually more simple than you think. The answer is simply because the people were modernizing as things were modernizing. So a lot of stuff in the Kingdom of Congo, anywhere you would go, a lot of stuff would be replaced with better stuff. And you can see even around here, the modern stuff has fully replaced the Kingdom of Congo. And this is true in a lot of places around the world. Some places in England, you literally have to like remove a road in order to find what's really under there, the cool stuff that people who built roads long time ago didn't care to build over, or didn't check if there's anything before you build a road. You can see just a church, one of the oldest churches in the Kingdom of Congo, just randomly. And in other places, you find, again, they were building out of many things. Now, I'm not going to overplay it and pretend they built everything out of stone. But the reading, like if we read it, we can easily tell that stone and metal and firearms and just modernization was at the core of this kingdom. And again, if you look around, You're not looking at huts or anything right now. You're looking at a modern city, and even though it was colonized, anything like that, it doesn't matter. I mean, they were colonized very late in the 1800s, but that doesn't matter because, again, the colonizers that came in, they explained what they saw, and they didn't explain a small place. They didn't explain a place to mess with. They didn't explain people who are easy to take over. They explained, you know, gun battles between them and the locals. And so this is what we're talking about. But if we go back 1600s, we use the dictionary, we use the travel, we use the fact that they were sending missions to the Americas, probably sending missions to Japan that were not written about, but you can see in some of the Japanese pictures that some of those dudes, the black dudes that are there, they clearly come from the western side of Africa because they have camels and other stuff like that. Not that there's no camels in Eastern Africa, but the reason why I'm saying that is because the people, the human beings who are traveling with them, are literally dressed like the Portuguese, meaning that they are within the either within the colonized small regions of the Portuguese, which fell a lot of them still fell under the Kingdom of Congo. They had to respond to the King of Congo whenever he gave an order, and then the other ones, Mozambique, which is where they think a lot of the Africans did come from. But the reason why I say it's probably more the West is because of the camels. I do not think that a lot of people in Mozambique even cared about what a camel looked like, whereas people in West Africa, they would have had to load them to some degree. This beautiful image, we'll get back to the Kingdom of Congo, tells a great story to me because for a couple of reasons. One, if you zoom into these images and start counting the number of black people, you will see that they actually outnumber the number of white people. And secondly, you will notice that a lot of the things they're carrying are very African. And so a lot of the, let's call it gift giving to the Japanese, everything that they're going to see that's novel is African. For example, this caged lion right here, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. This guy's just walking around carrying a lion over the seas to come and show some random people in another country far away. Now, a lot of you have seen this image before, and it's a drawing made at the time of the Kingdom of Congo, and you can tell that it's the Kingdom of Congo's main base for a couple of reasons. One, it's written there. And then secondly, you can see that the people who are bringing things to the place are mainly Africans. In fact, I can't even see a single European in this picture. So I want you to picture how Japan looked before, as I showed you. That was Japan. This is what Congo looked like at the time. And I know people are going to go, we don't have many pictures to work on when it comes to the Kingdom of Congo. Everyone that we do have looks amazing. And I'm still going to zoom in further. Now, remember, if we compare that church that was there, it would be only one of these things that were established. Just look around the area. You can see there. I mean, I could personally think, if I had to take a guess, there's probably about 40 houses here. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Yeah, I would guess about 40 houses located just behind that one mountainous area. In fact, it's on a mountain. Now, before we carry on, I want to remind you this is a real image made at the time of the Kingdom of Congo. And we have to ask ourselves, why would these guys exaggerate? Why would they lie and pretend that there's other stuff when this is what happened? And you can see they put A, B, and C to show the difference in actuality. So this isn't an imagination. This isn't a fiction. This is reality. You can see this beautiful image right here of what it might have looked like. In fact, what it did look like. And you can see the context to it is very good. And of course, you can see there is a lot of Portuguese influence, but they still kept their own thing building on a mountain. Number one, that's how you fortify in Africa. You don't necessarily build a wall. Well, in the Bantus, you don't necessarily build a wall. You start by building on a mountain. Then you start building etchings going back and forth. Right next to that, we have a whole bunch of other buildings. And remember, we have underpasses, we have, these curves and bridges and all kinds of other things that's there. And so this is kind of why I don't like watching a lot of the movies that are about the Kingdom of Congo because they put too much like, oh, it was like this tribal no, it was not. It was not a tribal region. In fact, if you're making a movie about it, you'd probably make it look more similar to what things look like today than you would make it look to, I don't know, like the Zulu. Like for example, I'll give an example. It's a good example. The Zulu Kingdom, which I think is a lot of the reason why some people use um, that type of look because they got used to the Zulus, who, like I said, there were several tribes in Africa, and different tribes were not at different stages of development, but they were more comfortable with different things. The Zulus, the early Zulus, there were some other Zulus who were captured under the Zulus who used stone independently of Europeans. But the Zulus were one of those who tended to build out of straw and they tended to build out of sticks and mud brick. But they were not unaware of their close neighbors right there who built out of stone. They just chose not to. They were also not unaware. They were also aware of other people who dressed in cotton before the Europeans got there. Now, the way they wore cotton was very different, and there was some surprise when some Africans noticed how the Europeans were dressed. I'm not saying that they were perfectly comfortable with every modernization, but the Zulus, which again became a byword for savagery, people go, why is that a byword for savagery? Because within the Europeans, Africa was not a savage land. It was the Zulus, and this is the sad part. It was the Zulus specifically which they used as like an example of quote unquote a savage race winning against more educated races or whatever the wording I need to put over there. If you went slightly north to Mozambique, you have a whole bunch of civilizations with cities, both independent of the Portuguese and with the Portuguese and Arabs and all this other stuff. Again, minority groups, but they were there. Getty ruins. You're talking about a whole bunch of stuff. Just go north a little bit. You got north of the Zulus. You've got the Limpopo areas. You've got the Manikeni areas. You've got all of these areas, the Botswana areas, all of these areas that had both groups. Like I said, at the same time, you have people who refuse to live in stone buildings, and then you have people who absolutely live in stone buildings at the same in the same region. I mean, literally, you could walk to each other. Returning to Congo, I think some people take a lot of these images that you see of black people at the time dressed like this, and I think they take it as like a suggestion or an idea rather than yeah, that's actually what they wore at the time. Now, obviously, this guy's dressed like a Portuguese, but I mean, his head and everything looks like a classical Bantu person. And this other guy, the King of Congo, which I mentioned earlier, he is dressed in the typical Congolese style. We're not talking about having a little bit of cloth. because a lot of these movies they do that. They put a whole bunch of leather and then they put cloth, and I think it's to make it look old, to make it like, oh, this is tribal. But that's not what they look like. Even the warriors didn't dress like that. If we read it, which maybe we should, you can see that there were tribes, which will be explained. The Europeans didn't even understand this at the time. There were tribes that refused to dress with cotton and stuff like that, seeing it as overburdensome. Why waste your time do that? And they wore leather. But the kings of Congo and some of the warriors were not one of them. So you can see here, as it says, that the court of the king of Congo, of the people of the Congo before and after it became Christian. So this is the dress style of the people of the kingdom of Congo before they were introduced to the Portuguese. This guy decided that was important, and the way they were dressed after they met the Portuguese. So hitherto we have clearly seen how the Christian religion took life, blah blah blah, and befell it. Now it is time to describe also the manners and customs of the kingdom of court of King Congo. In ancient times, the king and the courtiers, as we said before, wore garments made of the palm tree. Now, I think it's important that I give examples of these because a lot of people, when they think of this, they're going to think it's lesser, but this is um, raffia fiber, which is what these clothes are made of. As you can see, they're beautiful once they've been put together and they've been made into a fine fiber. So he says, in ancient times, the king and the courtiers, as we said before, wore garments made from the palm tree, which hung from the girdle downwards and were fastened with belts of the same material. You can see here, this guy's also fastened, of beautiful workmanship. Important. In front also, they wore as ornaments and made like an apron delicate skins of kivered cats, martens, and sables. So there they're wearing leather. And also, by way of display, a cape on the shoulders. Keep that in mind. So this guy is describing a person who's dressed quite, you know, they're dressed very well. They're not dressed like just choosing to dress anyway. In front also, blah blah blah. Display a cape on the shoulders. Next, the bare skin was a circular garment, somewhat like a rocher, reaching to the knees and made like a net from the threads of fine palm tree cloths. Taffels hanging from the meshes, these rochers, which were called incuto, they threw back on the right shoulder so as to leave the hand free, and on the same shoulder carried a zebra's tail fastened to a handle, according to the ancient custom in those parts. They wore very small yellow and red caps, square on the top, which fiercely covered the head and were used more for show than as protection from the sun or atmosphere. Now, the movie Jinga from Brazil, I think, is one of the best when it comes to portraying this because before the Portuguese arrive, they portray the families dressed in this way, and it's beautiful and everything. So, yeah, basically, that was a slight rundown, even though I wanted to add more information in there, of what the Kingdom of Congo was like and its many provinces and its many neighbors, its warriors, and all kinds of stuff, and the fact that, you know, they were fast learners. They went from mildly big civilization to extremely large civilization, which was on par with any other place in the world. And not only did it modernized so fast that some people didn't even realize that it had modernized over and over again. And remember, the picture that I'm showing you, that early one, that's the early pictures. It remodernized. It took other ideas that came later on, but got rid of them when it was modernizing again. And that's the story, the early story of the Kingdom of Congo before we dive deep into exact people.